We're up to verse 164 of Surah al-Baqarah, and we'll start with the recitation. Shall I share my screen?
هل تسلم على المشاهدين؟ أستاذ أحمد.
We should give salama. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Inshallah. All right.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار والفلك التي تجري في البحر بما ينفع الناس وما أنزل الله من السماء من ماء فأحيا به الأرض بعد موتها وبث فيها من كل دابة وتصريف الرياح والسحاب المسخر بين السماء والأرض لآيات لقوم يعقلون. ومن الناس من يتخذ من دون الله أندادا يحبونهم كحب الله والذين آمنوا أشد حبا لله ولو يرى الذين ظلموا إذ يرون العذاب أن القوة لله جميعا وأن الله شديد العذاب. إذ تبرأ الذين اتبعوا من الذين اتبعوا ورأوا العذاب وقطعت بهم الأسباب. وقال الذين اتبعوا لو أن لنا كرة فنتبرأ منهم كما تبرؤوا منا كذلك يريهم الله أعمالهم حسرات عليهم وما هم بخارجين من النار. يا أيها الناس كلوا مما في الأرض حلالا طيبا ولا تتبعوا خطوات الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين. إنما يأمركم بالسوء والفحشاء وأن تقولوا على الله ما لا تعلمون. صدق الله العظيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. So we're picking up on our study of these ayat, and this translation, as before, is adapted from Professor Abdul Halim's translation. And these ayat follow from the sequence in which we have encountered various engagements with the people of the book, the communities who have veered from the way of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And then the last ayah that we had looked at in the previous page, Allah Azza wa says, وَإِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُوَ الرَّحْمَنُ الرَّحِيمُ. So the core message then in that ayah is about the oneness of God, covering, of course, both his existence and his uniqueness. And these are points which can have multiple layers of meaning for those who are hearing them. They are being reminded of the oneness of this God who is speaking through this final revelation and who has spoken to those communities before. And they're being brought back to the core of the message. The entire purpose of the establishment of scripture is to call people to the worship of the one God. So with that in mind, then the following ayat, the ones which we are reading today, can be seen as the dalil, can be seen as the evidence of this existence and oneness of God. And so, inshallah, with that in mind, we can read the translation. In the creation of the heavens and earth, in the alternation of night and day, in the ships that sail the seas with beneficial goods for people, in the water which God sends down from the sky, giving life to the earth when it has been barren, and scattering all kinds of creatures over it, in the changing of the winds and clouds that run their appointed courses between the sky and earth. There are signs in all these for those who use their minds. Even so, there are some who set up others besides God as rivals to him, loving them with the love due to God. But the believers have greater love for God. If only those wrongdoers could see themselves when they will face the torment and find that all power belongs to God and that God punishes severely. When those who have been followed disown their followers, when they see all the suffering and all bonds between them are severed, and the followers will say, if only we had one last chance, we would disown them as they now disown us. In this way, God will make them see their deeds as a source of bitter regret. They shall not leave the fire. Mankind, eat what is good and lawful from the earth, and do not follow Satan's footsteps, for he is your sworn enemy. He always commands you to do what is evil and indecent, and to say things about God that you do not really know.
Imam Baqai mentioned that this first verse, and I remember one of my close friend of mine who was a convert, he said this was one of his favorite verses of the Qur'an. Allah's signs are so manifest. Obviously, like Ustadh Sohaib mentioned, after the uluhiyyat, the oneness of God's divinity was mentioned in verse 163, this is sort of showing the oneness in his rububiyyah, that in his lordship and the universe. But also it points, Imam Baqai says that this verse is trying to prove the unity in power, that all qudra and quwwah, as the other verses coming up are alluding to, that there's a strong unity in them. And because the point is to drive home that all power, even if it's connected to external causes, ultimately come from one source of power, the causes are very explicitly mentioned here, as like the ships carrying good things, life being, water being the source of life on earth and the creatures, and then the winds being the source of the spreading of the clouds. So many causes are mentioned, as well as the, and it's all connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I really like that point about the unity in God's power has been highlighted with the causes. The ships, it says, you know, the ships that sail, what does it say? In the ships that sail the seas. And, you know, in the old tafsirs, they say it's really the ships have no power. But in today's modern transport, the ships are self-propelled, aren't they? Using coal power. So what was majazi in the past, from what I understood, is actually haqiqi now. But it just, yeah, we really, all of us that use international goods, which most of our things come from, we can really connect with this verse.
Yeah, like this verse is really telling us, like, there's the kitab, you know, the Qur'an, which is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then here is a created book of Allah, and the verse actually talks about 8 different signs, or we could call them cosmological proofs, perhaps, that in their own way all really talk about, I think, as you mentioned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence, his oneness, his qudra, his power, and really is telling us that in the absence of a Rabb, of you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rububiyyah, his sustaining, maintaining the world, all these affairs of the people and the world, then the world would be go into a chaos, even if it's for a moment. So it really reminds us over and over again. We're talking about with Ustadh Sadeq early on about uluhiyyah. Like, it's a bit harder to really grasp Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's uluhiyya, His it's a bit more abstract. I know that's how I feel anyway. But His rububiyyah, His lordship, is I guess for a lay person like me, let me say, it is very apparent, and all these things are perhaps are signs of His rububiyyah, as Ustadh Sadeq mentioned. Yeah.
And we're just speaking with Sohaib as well, like he's in England, Scotland, sorry. I always get confused with the terminology around that geography.
Careful.
Or the greater UK, is that what it's the correct
I
word?
forgive you because of your distance. So the point is that we are on opposite ends of the earth. Northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. Scotland is sort of particularly north compared to some. But our time zones, we had to figure out and negotiate our timings, especially in this third term, because our time zones are actually shifting at the moment. And for us, so it's the same as in America, spring forward, fall back, right? So we don't call it fall here, we call it autumn. But anyway, the spring forward in the springtime, we go into what is called British summertime. And is that what we'd also call daylight savings time? But we don't call it that, we call it British summertime. And then around this time of year, so at the end of this month, inshallah, we go back to GMT. Right, so there's a misconception that GMT is London time. GMT is London time, except in the summer. So for half the year. Other than that, we're in BST. So then, as we were trying to figure out our timings, we had this situation where we realized that, well, in Australia, it's happening in the other direction. You spring back and fall forward. So, well, you don't actually. It's just that your summer is in the other part of the year. Right? So you're also springing forward, but in October, and you're falling back in March. Is that right?
Yeah.
So this is among the great signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we're living it here while working out our awkward time zone rotations, and that's why we had to move the class 30 minutes forward just to make it possible that at the end of this month I'll be able to join when our time zones diverge even more. This is just a sign of the fact that, look, subhanallah, this earth is so vast. There are so many variations in the night and day. So when Allah mentions ikhtilaf al-layli wal-nahar, that has two quite apparent meanings. The one of them is ikhtilaf, is translated here as the alternation. Ikhtilaf, each one comes, khalf al-akhar, which is the khulf to the other. It is the replacement. And that in itself tells you something about the nature of the world, the earth, the globe. Ibn Ashur goes into some, because he's a modern mufassir, and he is thinking about, okay, how do you explain things correctly according to what is now established in science? And so he's saying that from this ayah, you can then understand that contrary to some beliefs and cosmologies, then the day and the night, the light and the dark, these are not like substances upon the earth, but they are what do we call it? A'rad. They're attributes or contingent qualities that happen as the earth rotates, right? So as the earth spins, night follows day and day follows night. And in fact, in every part of the earth, there is both night and day in succession. And everywhere, at every moment, there is some part of the earth which is in night and some part of the earth which is in day. So in this ayah and in the way it's worded, وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ, we find quite a splendid indication of this reality, of the vastness of the earth, but also the interconnectedness of the earth. And subhanAllah, I feel like now the fact that we, many centuries after the revelation of these ayat, are able to live that in a certain way, appreciate that in a certain way, to talk simultaneously on opposite ends of the earth, this is from the ayat of Allah as well.
Yeah.
And it's among the ayat that are contained within the ayat which are spelled out here. Because Allah Azza wa Jal points both to those things in the creation, and He points to the way that He has subjected the creation to you. وَالْفُلْكِ الَّتِي تَجْرِي فِي الْبَحْرِ بِمَا يَنْفَعُ النَّاسِ. So the way that the ships sail, and we are able to harness the energy, harness the winds, and we are able to use that for our advantage. This is from Allah's ayat. He has given us the ability as human beings to do that. And think back to how in the story of Adam alayhi salam, He has favored the human being. He has given him the ability to name things. He has given him the ability to systemize thought and categorize things, which is the basis for being able to do science as well as other things, right? Allamahul asma, right? Among those meanings is that he's able to actually identify things in a way that he can then direct towards his or mankind's collective benefit, and to communicate with each other, because that communication with each other enables us then to harness each other's expertise. So the shipbuilding is an illustration of this and not the end of the story, because now, you know, you were both doing, you know, an ambassador. You were being ambassadors for ISRA there in the US, right? So here again, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala has allowed the mankind to harness the understanding of the forces and the winds and the seas and the rotation of the earth, and factor all these things into flight and air travel.
Yeah.
And this, you know, is among the great signs of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, contrary to maybe some people who get so caught up in man's ability that they become, you know, humanists, but in a certain way worshipping the human being and forgetting that if Allah wished, He could cause the things to collapse. And He could cause the things to collapse not by, as you might think, you know, sending a thunderbolt against that plane, you know, wal-'iyadhu billah, much as that is in His power. But we depend for our continued existence upon things remaining upon the way that they are. We depend upon the natural laws. The laws are not laws by which Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is bound. They are sunan. You know, the way to think about this in Islamic and religious terminology is these are sunan of Allah, or adat of Allah, His ways and patterns which He does not change unless He
I
wills to
just have
change.
a,
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question about this ikhtilaf when you mentioned it. Could we understand it with what we were just talking about, this changing of night and day, yani ikhtilaf al-layl and ikhtilaf al-nahar?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah,
Because the Quran mentioned the mashariq wal magharib, and the fact that there's plural, you can literally see the sun set in different places in the horizon throughout the year. And I think there are some views that all mashriqain wal maghribain, I think it talks about two, one talks about plural, and other times singular. But with the daylight savings, it's really yeah,
exactly. I wanted to take us there eventually, but I was having quite a delightful tadabbur moment around the first part of ikhtilaf. But yes, ikhtilaf can also mean the variation and the changes that happen within nights and days, right? So even within Scotland or within Sydney and Australia, you can see that the nights get longer during the winter, they get shorter during the summer. So even in one place, there's ikhtilaf. And then there's ikhtilaf around the world. And as you pointed to, مشارق الأرض ومغاربها, رب المشرقين, you know, the dual can sometimes be intended for the plural, or you can think about it as like the extremes. So the furthest mashriq, the nearest mashriq, you know, there's different ways of interpreting that, but all of it points to the dominion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we can read that within what we now understand about the spherical nature of the earth, just as people may have also understood it according to other cosmologies and theories. And that's okay, because it is not a primary concern of the revelation to correct people's cosmology, but rather to direct them to what lies behind that and appreciating the creator. So you can have different theories, and there are still flat earth Muslims, by the way. Some scholars have advanced this kind of view, and there are people who stick to that, and I've encountered them, and I try not to get into those discussions. But even if you do think that the earth is flat, you can read these ayat in a certain way, and you would still appreciate the point behind it, which is why they say that the Qur'an is a book of signs, not a book of science. We do sometimes have to reckon with the fact that, how do we ensure that the Qur'an is not seen to contain scientific error? So we need to look at the suitable ta'wil, the suitable interpretation of certain ayat, in which, it doesn't have to be read as the earth being flat, even though there's some ayat that by themselves talk about the spreading out of the earth like a carpet. Okay, but you can spread a carpet over a curve. Right? There's nothing very difficult about that if you want to see it in light of what we now know to be scientific fact. But otherwise, it can be read in other ways. And the points are sometimes made in a literary way, which is actually a theological reflection, right? Theological meditation. Inna fi khalq as-samawati wal ard. We didn't even touch on as-samawati wal ard. I would remind us that Ibn Ashur has a kind of funky theory here. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's very, very unusual. He believes as-samawati wal ard refers to the solar system. So as-samawat he actually sees as a reference to the planets of the solar system. A way to kind of bring that closer to the commonplace view would be it's the orbits of these planets are the samawat. Not to say that's the extent of Allah's creation, far, far from it. As well, I'm sure even he was aware in his time that we have now seen far past our solar system. But just that it's the kind of environment of our earth and of the ones who are being spoken to in this Qur'an. And it sort of expands your view about, maybe just thinking psychedelically here, that, we're being spoken of within our world and our context. And there are, in a sense, other worlds, even within the observable universe, right? Much as there are billions, potentially, of solar systems. But we are spoken to as the center of our world. Is the earth the center of the entire universe? I'm sure we can make a good case for that, right? From an Islamic and Quranic cosmology point of view. But it's not our concern, but the scope within the samawati wal ard, there is a lot here for us to observe and to ponder. And here's an important thing, I think, which we should keep in mind when studying ayat like this. And I was really delighted that Ibn Ashur quoted something from al-Fakhr Razi. So it made my job easy. I got to read the two tafsirs at once. And in this quote, he basically says something that I always say. It made me feel really good. When you see the ulama say something that you're used to saying. I always say the best tafsir for an ayah like this is to watch a documentary, right? There's so many documentaries that you could make out of this ayah, or which you could bring to bear in the tafsir of this ayah. As-samawati wal ard. How can we talk about this when you haven't even caught up with what the telescopes have been? Just I was hearing on the news yesterday, they're sending some vessel over to Europa, the moon of Saturn. Is it Saturn or Jupiter? And it's طبعا my own معلومات. So anyway, so they're sending Europa. I remember Europe. So this, people are doing that, and we are like, let's read the books, and let's get the information about the heavens and the earth from medieval scholars. With all respect and love for the medieval scholars, as you know, that's a genuine love. What did they know really about this? Right? I wouldn't even go to Sheikh Galileo for this information. That's outdated information now. How can you understand these ayat without looking at what has now been discovered and things that we can actually see and visualize based on these marvelous tools which Allah Azza wa Jalla has again subjected to our use, to be able to travel into space or to send telescopes and probes to gather information. That is not just for the unbelievers to enjoy. That is, وَنَحْنُ أَحَقُّ بِهَا, we have even more right as the worshippers of Allah to delight in this information. So I always say the best tafsir that you could watch is not a lecture by a Muslim scholar typically, but even you can watch the atheists talking about it, but just you look at it through your Imani lens and you see what they don't see, right? So I'll tell you what Imam al-Razi said. It is narrated that Umar ibn al-Husam was reading Kitab al-Majisti. Do you know Kitab al-Majisti? I didn't know either. I just had to look it up just now. So Kitab al-Majisti is also known as Al-Magest. But then when it's called Al-Magest, I'm like, still, that's taken from, the Al here is a giveaway that this title comes from Arabic. And this is written by Ptolemy, with a silent P. Claudius Ptolemy, around in the 2nd century after Isa alayhi salam, right? So he lived around AD 100 to 170. It was written in Greek. It's known in Arabic, and the Muslim scholars writing in Arabic were at the top of the field at this time. So they wrote commentaries on it, and they called it al-Majisti. And I thought, does that come from the word does it come from majesty? But actually not quite. It comes from the Greek word meaning greatest. Right? Majesty means the greatest. So this is, in other words, an unbeliever's book on mathematics and cosmology and astronomy. So he says Umar ibn al-Husam was reading Kitab al-Majisti to Umar al-Abhari. And then some of the fuqaha said to him one day, "What's this that you're reading?" He said, "I'm doing tafsir of an ayah from the Qur'an, namely, أَفَلَمْ يَنْظُرُوا إِلَى السَّمَاءِ فَوْقَهُمْ كَيْفَ بَنَيْنَاهَا." Surah Qaf. Don't they look to the heavens above them, how we have constructed them? فَأَنَا أُفَسِّرُ كَيْفِيَّةَ بُنْيَانِهَا. So I'm doing tafsir of how it was constructed, the sky was constructed. And then Al-Razi says, and Al-Abhari was true in what he said. So whoever is more deeply immersed in the oceans of the creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more aware of the greatness. كَانَ أَكْثَرَ عِلْمًا بِجَلَالِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى وَعَظَمَتِهِ. So that is such a beautiful principle, and the basis of what we might call tafsir ilmi. And we have this kind of dichotomy between tafsir ilmi versus i'jaz ilmi or whatever. But our point here is tafsir ilmi, that you bring to bear whatever knowledge you can in order to appreciate these ayat in which Allah Azza wa Jalla talks about various phenomena, especially creation of the heavens and the earth and the things upon the earth and the animals and plants and the different parts of life. The more that you can know about them, the more that you appreciate the Creator, and the more that you increase in your grasp of the proofs that are contained in this ayah. If you know nothing about samawat wal ard, this ayah means nothing to you. If you know nothing about the ships, this ayah means nothing to you. If you know nothing about the winds and the clouds, these are just words for you. But when you actually recognize the signs, then this ayah, the revealed ayah, the speaking ayah, tells you something about how to connect those phenomena that you can observe to the reality of the oneness of Almighty God.
And I think you're really also missing out on a lot of nuances, subtleties in the universe, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works in intricacies, how sophisticated this universe is. So every sign really just only should increase our knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in return it should contribute to our love towards Him. So we're really missing out on all that's around us, which are readily available to us. By the way, Ustadh said there was Jupiter's moon. I just looked it up quickly so that people don't wonder what it was.
What did you look up? Sorry. Oh, Jupiter. Oh, yes, Jupiter's moon.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, yeah.
The mission that it's going to the Jupiter's moon.
Good.
So
you see, we don't even have to travel there now.
Yeah.
We can just Google it and see.
That's it. Inshallah.
Yes, Europa.
Let me just bring back up the thing translation.
So perhaps you have some points about some of the specific ayat in this ayah.
Yeah, there is. I mean, despite all that's mentioned in the previous verse and the verses before as well, yet the polytheists and I guess the next verse is really referring to people who set up others besides God. So it could be polytheists, it could be Jews, or it could really be an address to anyone who does that. But there's a narration by Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. He says, I said, O Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what is the greatest sin? And in return he said, to appoint a rival, and the word that he uses, and taj'ala lillahi niddan wa huwa khalaqak, to appoint a rival to Allah while He alone has created you. And the verse, I guess, uses andada as well, so equals, rivals, but also in Surah Luqman as well, in Shirka la zulmin azim, the greatest, shirk is the greatest wrongdoing, which Luqman alayhi salam says to his son. But even Kathir goes on actually, and he gives many verses from the Quran which highlight, like I guess in the following verses, when these people actually they are exposed to fire and punishment, they end up cursing one another, they end up disowning one another. And ultimately, obviously, they just blame one another as well. So many verses of the Quran that mentions about this concept that Ibn Kathir also gives here as well.
Okay, I think you're talking about verse 165, Ustadh Ahmed, right?
Yeah, so yeah, both of them. Yeah, we're just covering 165 and 166 as well together.
Yeah, here it's the translation is loving them with the love due to God, but the believers have greater love for Allah. يحبونهم كحب الله. There Imam Baqai makes a comment, and I actually wanted clarification from Ustadh Sohaib and yourself. He says it could be read as maf'ul mabniyan ala maf'ul and mabniyan ala al-fa'il. I think it was referring to hubbillah, and he gives two different meanings.
Mabni, what did he say the two possibilities are?
I think the phrase kahubbillah, it can either be mabniyan.
Is it mudaf ila al-fa'il or mudaf ila al-maf'ul? Was that the point?
Yeah. So I just couldn't. I didn't know how you could read it. I'll just quickly bring it up.
While you're doing that, I mean, there are a couple of possibilities here for how we say kahubbillah.
Yeah.
So you can see it as, they love Allah, or they love these rivals as much as they love Allah, because that is one of the categories of people that they worship Allah according to their mixed up beliefs. So they still acknowledge Allah as the creator, and then they set up the idols and the various type of shuraka that they claim among the jinn or the the heavenly bodies, right? And they worship them, seeking a way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as is mentioned in some ayat. So this is a category of people, then they have love of Allah, supposedly, but they have love of the idols. And so they have made a sharik or a nid, right? That's to say, this rival, partner, or supposed equal in the love of Allah. So that is one way of analyzing, and it would apply to certain people. Then there is another way of seeing it, which is يُحِبُّونَهُمْ, they love them like the people who love Allah. Right. So here there is a kind of equation made, and then after that there is an inequation made. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. So in a certain way there is an equivalence, and that equivalence we can say is a qualitative one, right? They direct the love of the divine towards that which is not divine. They direct the love which is worship towards that which is not deserving of worship. يُحِبُّونَهُمْ كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. Now, in quantitative terms, right, just to be sort of blunt about the difference, right? In quantitative terms, the believers, that's to say, God's true believers, love Allah more than those people love their idols. And one of the ways that we could say that they love them more, that they love Allah Azza wa Jal more, is what I'm saying, is that they love Him fully and consistently. Because there are some narrations about people, they became frustrated with their idols because actually لا ينفعهم ولا يضرهم. That's the fact of the matter. Sometimes they'd go to their idols and then they'd get frustrated that, you know, they'd even smash an idol themselves, right? The kuffar, the mushrikun would do this according to some stories, right? And that's because their love, how are they supposed to have a consistent love for these things which are not worthy of love? Whereas those who are lovers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always love Him, even when things don't go according to our will. They love what Allah chooses for them, because Allah Azza wa Jal is worthy of this type of love, of the fullness of love, the comprehensiveness of love, the depth of love. أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ.
I really like that point about qualitative same and quantitatively. It's also a reminder that we all have a part in our hearts that is that love. We meant to love a divine being, and if it's not filled with the love for the divine, the one divine being, it's going to be filled with something else, whether you like it or not. Ustadh Ahmed and I were at the breakfast gathering recently with the Mufti of Australia, and he quoted something, and I've always heard in other language, but not in Arabic. He says, "Al-kawnu la ta'rifu al-faragh." The universe does not allow any emptiness, a vacuum. So it's in the nature of the universe that it's bound to be filled. So same with our hearts. We either make sajda with our foreheads to the one God or to many gods. We either love one God or many gods. So they've actually replaced that love that was due, like the qualitatively, as you said. But the believers obviously are greater. And then Imam Baqai also goes on to speak about how really what you love, إذا غلب هواه, that's what you worship. Strong love is a sign of worship. So regardless whether you call it worship or not, but if your hope and fear and your obedience is fully invested in that, then that's worship. And you know, he quotes other verses like وَأُشْرِبُوا فِي قُلُوبِهِمِ الْعِجْلَ بِكُفْرِهِمْ and أَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you seen the one who takes his desires or his love? Because hawa is also a word used for deep love in Arabic, isn't it? There's like so many words for love in Arabic. Hawaitu means I fell in love, if I'm not mistaken. It literally means falling as well. So
yes.
I literally fell, stumbled down.
Right. So I think that's really nice that we have in English the word adore, you know, which can just mean to love passionately, but then it's sometimes used for worship as well, adoration. So some translations use that in place instead of worship.
Yeah.
And Ibn al-Qayyim also provided a definition of ibadah, which was, غاية الحب was it غاية الخضوع or الذل. So basically the combination of being, giving the maximal amount of love to something and the maximal quality within yourself of humility and lowliness. So when these two things combine, this is the sense in which ibadah exists, right?
Just with the ending of verse 164, for a people, لِقَوْمٍ يَعْقِلُونَ, Imam Harali and Baqai makes this point that the word qawm, it's got these connotations of a people of power and strength. It's usually just juxtaposed with the word nisa. And so there's this power element. So people that really use their minds, although it's been used for negative terms as well, but they juxtapose the word qawm as opposed to wamin and nasi. And they always attribute the word nas to the word naus, which means those who go back and forth. So there is this positive element usage of the word qawm and sort of somewhat negative of the word nas. The ending of this 165 is really it's very scary, and it just shows you how the Quran waits for the reader's imagination to fill the rest of the sentence, because it gives a condition, shart, but it doesn't give the jawab. If only those wrongdoers could. The English says could see. Would that be a ta'wil of it? I always understood it, and when they will see.
Oh, I saw you talk about Hadith Qudsi. I was like, which
no, could see.
Right, okay. If only those wrongdoers could see. This part of the ayah is actually extraordinarily difficult to translate. I spent
it's very
a long
hard
time on this, and it's much easier if you're using the qira'ah of the Jumhur actually, or of Nafi and others. وَلَوْ تَرَى الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا. Only you would see the wrongdoers. إِذْ يَرَوْنَ الْعَذَابِ. It's much easier to translate, in fact. But in the sense of وَلَوْ يَرَى الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا, the best way to interpret this is to say, if they could only see ahead as to what's going to happen to them, perhaps they would fix themselves up now. Because there will be a time they will see the punishment.
Okay.
Yeah. وَلَوْ يَرَى الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا إِذْ يَرَوْنَ الْعَذَابَ أَنَّ الْقُوَّةَ لِلَّهِ. So then we need to sort of the and find helps to string together the way the sentence works according to that qira'ah of yara, whereas the other people have an easier interpretation. But this translation is following the more popular reading of Hafs.
Imam Baqai also talks about istara, like as in when the Prophet ﷺ sees them. Yani subhanallah, just the mujarrad ru'ya to Jahannam. Yani just imagine for the first time they see hellfire. Everything in their mind it's and there's another verse of the Quran, it always talks about them looking at the hellfire. There's another one that says and they hide وَهُمْ أَسَرُّوا النَّدَامَ. No, I forgot the wording.
وَأَسْرُوا النَّدَامَ.
وَأَسَرُّوا النَّدَامَ. They hide this regret, like it's so filling in them when they see it. So it's like that verse where if only a smallest touch of the Lord's punishment was to touch them, the words of used the very small, the small breath of punishment touches them. Massahum nam. This verse is also similar. If they were just to see, just the mujarrad ru'ya, just to see, mere seeing would make them realize everything, see haqq and batil, everything.
Yes. لَتَرَوُنَّ الْجَحِيمِ. And even on the flip side, the hellfire is sometimes described as seeing them. إِذَا رَأَتْهُمْ مِنْ مَكَانٍ بَعِيدٍ. أعوذ بالله.
Yeah, as if it's waiting.
And even the word jahim, if you go into the etymology of it, is used for like the staring of a lion when it catches sight of its prey.
Oh, really?
The word is used for that. Yeah, there's depths in these word choices. La tarawunna al-jahim. So you will stare, and it will be staring back at you. But you won't be staring because you want to look. At this point, you'll be made to look, and even we might take the implication of this that they will be forced to see something that through their life they refuse to see. They refuse to see, but there will come a time when you will have to see it. And if only they could see now, they would understand and they would fix up. But because they're turning away.
That lion waiting for its prey, that imagery you just described, a brother told me recently he was really caught by the verse in Surah Naba'a, Mirsada, that Jahannam lies just waiting to just capture its prey. He was really moved by that. Just simply seeing it, subhanAllah. And then now we're going to talk about Instagram followers and the followed ones. What are their conversations in the hereafter?
Well, let's get into that then. So they're going to, if they could see the outcome on that time, they will see everything that causes them to regret. But what is the point in regretting once all is said and done? Instead, you should see something that causes you to change before it is too late. And those who have been followed disown their followers. And subhanAllah, now you can link it to things like Instagram, which is a more kind of what can we say, trivial sort of following. But then there is, they can have real consequences. Like now, the way that power and following works might have a lot of things that didn't exist before. You used to have to be a powerful, charismatic person. Now you just have to have good lighting and editing software, and and the brand endorsements will come pouring in. And subhanAllah, the whole concept of following has now maybe got new dimensions. But here, maybe the political leaders, the religious priests who set themselves up as the authorities, and on that day they disown. And of course, the shaitan is at the head of this, as we know from the ayah in Surah Ibrahim, that there will come a time, when all is said and done, Iblis himself will be like, I don't know you. You're claiming to be my... No. I fear Allah. I know, subhanAllah. And that is the most, like, that ayah, if you read it and ponder on it, you just, like, don't get played. Nobody is going to stand by you on that day. Your followers won't stand by you, and the ones you are following certainly won't stand by you. They're the last ones who will stand by you, right?
Yeah.
People that you are following, they don't even know you in dunya. They're certainly not going to know you on the day of judgment. So they'll be like, we have nothing to do with them. And وَتَقَطَّعَتْ بِهِمُ الْأَسْبَابِ. Actually, Ibn Ashur has a different ta'wil of it. I don't know if it's a common one, but he says it's not the bonds between the two sides. He sees it as an image of, it's like someone has been climbing up a rope. This is like, and he's saying, like, for example, there's fruit on the top of this tree. They have invested all their hope in that fruit coming to fruition, right? And they're going to go and harvest it. They get to the top, and then the rope is cut and they fall. All their hope is lost. Everything is lost. He sees his meaning, and all the means to any success have now disappeared, and they are utterly left in despair.
Yeah, because the bihim doesn't necessarily mean between the followers and the followed. It could just mean the asbab of the followed, the matbu', that all their ropes of hopes are cut off. Imam Baqai says the wording, the format of taqatta'at, as in tafa'ala, that pattern, could also mean that one by one, shay'an fa shay'an, is cut off to increase their debasement in that situation. So everything people relied on one after the other could be interpreted to mean one after the other, cut off. And he also says that it shows that they had really no taqwa or a reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because if that was at least one of their sabab ropes that they held on to, that would have availed them, helped them in that situation. Yeah, again, the seeing of the punishment is repeated in this verse.
Yes, yes.
So could it be like a hal when the followed disown the followers while they seeing it, or is that's
it can be a hal, yeah. Not while they see so much, but having seen.
Yeah.
So then they say they have this regret, and they wish that they would have an opportunity to go back.
Now it's going to be the followers who say this, right? Not the followed. So verses 165, 166 was about the elite, whoever they are. I like the wording, ittaba'u wa tubi'u. It just goes to show that the same rules apply in any society, whether it's social media, politics. At the end of the day, you're going to have those who are followed and those who are followers. It's as simple as that. But be very careful. The verse is showing us who you follow, because they're going to disown you when you most need it. And yeah, let's go ahead with verse 6.
And before that, careful who you like, right? Likes and follows. These ayat are giving us a warning about likes and follows. What about share?
Because in kuntum tuhibbuna Allah fattabi'uni. First it begins with hub, then it goes to ittiba'.
Like and subscribe, everyone, to the deen of Allah, right? So then they say, if only we had one last chance, if only we get a one do-over. So here they'd have to be thinking something like, if only we could go back, and in this scenario, we know what we're doing, but those people who we had followed don't really know, so they're not able to fool us. They would come again, they would ask again, like and follow my batil, and we would say, no thanks, block, right? So that is what their scenario is. If only we could turn the tables on them. But all this, is such an unlikely scenario, right? It doesn't make sense. So there will come that time of regret, and you're supposed to reflect on it now. Here, Allah is allowing you to see. He's bringing it in front of you. If only they could see that day. Now He's putting it in front of you with the idh. The word idh, He's bringing all of that in, and there's an image. And if you are liqawmin ya'qilun, you will now actually be able to visualize this and see this in front of you before it is too late. Otherwise, there will come a time where it's like, oh, remember those, Allah told us that was going to happen. Now it's happening. And the proof has been established against you.
But with the followers, the humiliation that they see on that moment, because the people that they were relying on and they were following, there was some hope that they would be some sort of a shafi, intercessor, or do something for them on the day when it really mattered. But when their heroes, their idols, abandoned them, disowned them, they go through a humiliation that they're filled with rage, that only if we had a chance that we could just humiliate them as well. Like they've actually forgotten about momentarily that what their punishment is, but just that feeling of vengeance for that humiliation. Because all their life they loved and they perhaps supported and clapped for these leaders and made them who they were, but now they've left them and they don't have a chance to get back at them. So,
but even Kathir also mentions that if these people were to be sent back, they still wouldn't believe, and based on the verse from Surah An'am, even if they were to be sent back, they would certainly revert to what they were forbidden, so they're liars. But really, is it that they follow these people or they follow their hawa? Like it's ultimately their own whims and desires that lead them to these people whom they follow. So I think even if they're sent back, you know, it's not really those follow people who, you know, they follow making them astray, but because it's intrinsic, they want, they still stick to their ways, and they'll continue to do what they're doing. And the next verse, I feel, kind of flows through to that, like where he says, you know, do not follow Satan's footsteps. And perhaps, you know, the human being deviates step by step, following Shaitan's footsteps.
But it's a very good reminder that the Quran is telling us that, you know, don't blindly follow people, even if it's religious leaders. Don't follow people unless you're constantly, just know that any mortal can be someone that will disown you on the day where it matters most. And perhaps they're following, it was their hawa, but they love them. Like sometimes you can almost see them like taking the people they were following like mini gods, because if you love an idol, you know, you've seen there's a phenomena when young teenage people love an idol, they literally worship them. And so when that continues, they live, you know, if you spend your life loving an idol, you die loving them, you'll be resurrected loving them, but then resurrected loving them, and then to see them disown you when you need it most.
The idols have become human beings today.
Yeah.
The animate idols.
I think the Quran is saying, you know, as individuals, like, don't enslave yourself to just followers, like that's saying of Sayyidina Umar, مَتَى اسْتَعْبَدْتُمُ النَّاسَ وَقَدْ وَلَدَتْهُمْ أُمَّهَاتُهُمْ أَحْرَارًا. Why do you enslave people when their mothers have given to them birth as free humans? And be very careful who you follow, I think what it's saying. We have the Charyar, the four friends, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali. They're the ones we should follow. And I'll say something controversial. Not anyone after them. Not the Umayyads, not the Abbasids, not the Ottomans. We might get some questions. Yeah, God will make us see that these are the source of. Imam Baqai says initially the discussion was what's the consequence of the false aqaid, the deen. Then the question comes, what's the consequence of the actions? And then Allah will make they see their deeds as the source of bitter regret. You know, in another verse, Allah says very eloquently, وَقَدِمْنَا إِلَى مَا عَمِلُوا مِنْ عَمَلٍ فَجَعَلْنَاهُ هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا. And we approached the actions as if it was like a mountain or just scattered. So both their beliefs and their actions it becomes a source of. And hasarat is like Imam Baqai says, it's like one of the worst types of ta'assuf, like the worst types of regret. And they'll never leave the fire, meaning they're constantly willing and wishing wijha to get out of the fire. Yeah, for me personally, these psychological descriptions of the people entering hellfire are as scary as the actual hellfire itself. Allahumma hafazna.
I mean, shall we take a few minutes break?
Yeah, maybe we can go eat something that's good and lawful, inshallah.
Inshallah. So we'll come back maybe 22 the hour in 6 minutes. Okay.
Maybe.
هل لنا أن نسمع صوت المصري القراءة الأزهري الشريف؟
Is that your way of asking me to recite?
نعم من فضلك اشتقنا إلى صوتك.
طيب إن شاء الله, let's do that. Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. وإذا قيل لهم اتبعوا ما أنزل الله قالوا بل نتبع ما ألفينا عليه آباءنا أولو كان آباؤهم لا يعقلون شيئا ولا يهتدون ومثل الذين كفروا كمثل الذي ينعق بما لا يسمع إلا دعاء ونداء صم بكم عمي فهم لا يعقلون يا أيها الذين آمنوا كلوا من طيبات ما رزقناكم واشكروا لله إن كنتم إياه تعبدون إنما حرم عليكم الميتة والدم ولحم الخنزير وما أهل به لغير الله فمن اضطر غير باغ ولا عاد فلا إثم عليه إن الله غفور رحيم إن الذين يكتمون ما أنزل الله من الكتاب ويشترون به ثمنا قليلا أولئك ما يأكلون في بطونهم إلا النار ولا يكلمهم الله يوم القيامة ولا يزكيهم ولهم عذاب أليم أولئك الذين اشتروا الضلالة بالهدى والعذاب بالمغفرة فما أصبرهم على النار ذلك بأن الله نزل الكتاب بالحق وإن الذين اختلفوا في الكتاب لفي شقاق بعيد. But when it is said to them, follow the message that God has sent down, they answer, we follow the ways of our fathers. What, even though their fathers understood nothing and were not guided? Calling to disbelievers is like a herdsman calling to things that hear nothing but a shout and a cry. They are deaf, dumb, and blind, and they understand nothing. You who believe, eat the good things we have provided for you and be grateful to God, if it is truly Him that you worship. He has only forbidden you carrion, blood, pig's meat, and animals over which any name other than God's has been invoked. But if anyone is forced to eat such things by hunger, neither desiring them nor going to excess, he commits no sin. God is most merciful and forgiving. As for those who conceal the scripture that God sent down and sell it for a small price, they only fill their bellies with fire. God will not speak to them on the day of resurrection, nor will He purify them. An agonizing torment awaits them. These are the ones who exchange guidance for error and forgiveness for torment. How complacent they are at the threat of the fire. This is because God has sent the scripture with the truth. Those who pursue differences in the scripture are deeply entrenched in opposition. So I think we would need to go back a couple of ayahs into the
the last two verses, Ustadh.
Yes, so I'm just going to go back there so we can finish talking about that. Who can lead us through these?
The O mankind, Ya ayyuha, the harfun nidat, no longer used in, I think, modern English. That's why Professor Abdul Halim did not use it, or maybe Ustadh Sohaib is not a fan of Old English.
Of which part? O mankind?
Yeah, oh mankind, you know, like
Oh,
it's a small thing, but
this O thing is not really used, and there's not really much need for it.
yeah.
Yeah, well, Ibn Kathir mentions that, I mean, not regarding what Yusuf said, but just for those two verses, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala establishes that He is the only deity to be worshipped, and He is the the sustainer. So as the Lord, then He sets what is lawful and asks His servants to consume what is lawful and to stay away from the unlawful, and He forbade them from following the footsteps of Shaitan, meaning his methods which he misguides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's servants. And he gives some examples of like Bahira and some other types as well. But for example, the Bahira, he says, was a she camel whose milk was spread for the idols and nobody was allowed to milk it. And there's other like Jahiliyyah customs as well from different things, where if a camel gave birth twice to two she-males in a row, again, they would not touch that animal, they would not ride it. So some false practices that were introduced into people's lives, which made it difficult, unnecessarily difficult. So Ibn Kathir kind of mentions these as part of the part of the steps that follows Shaitan. Yeah.
So this address, Ayyuhan Nas, here in the translation is mankind. It may be really intended as more specific, because this is in the connection of words that are being said to the mushrikeen and errors that they are making. So yes, everyone is told to eat what is good and lawful from the earth, but there is a specific kind of problem or misconception or wrong action that's being addressed. So Ayyuhan Nas can just be people. People, meaning the mushrikeen. You should, in fact, eat what is good and lawful from the earth, halal and tayyiban. And I did some research into this a while back. I wrote an article about the idea of eating tayyib. Some of the mufassirun, they essentially explain the word tayyib as equals halal. So then there's just a kind of emphasis and reinforcement here in halalan, tayyiban. There are others who said, no, they don't mean the same. But what this points to is the fact that every halal is tayyib, right? Everything that Allah has allowed for you is something which contains good in it. Tayyib implying wholesome, beneficial, above suspicion, nourishing, all these good things. And then on the flip side, that He has made the things which are tayyib, made them halal. يحل لهم الطيبات ويحرم عليهم الخبائث. In the scripture, this the things which are actually good for you are the ones that Allah has permitted, and the things which are harmful are the ones that He has forbidden. So in the final analysis, every halal is tayyib and every haram is khabith. So this is all reasonable and sensible, but we should allow that there's a category of things which might be halal and not tayyib, unless we want to stop using the word halal for those things, right? Because halal might be a stronger word than mubah. So there are certain things that you could eat, and outside the restaurant they might have this big sign to write it like that in Arabic letters, halal, just so the non-Muslims can't find out is halal and get upset about it. That's what they do here. And a lot of restaurants even that are not run by Muslims, they use halal meat and they don't advertise it. But many things in there, might be doubtful about how those animals were actually treated in their life, how they were led to slaughter. We have different standards applied by sometimes different halal authorities, right? And I don't know if that's a big hot topic in Australia, but there's some hotness around it in the UK. And apparently the epicenter of hotness of this debate is South Africa, because it seems that over there they're absolutely loggerheads over what are the correct standards to apply on halal meat. But there could be some meat which in some way is more tayyib or more halal even, because there can be doubt over certain processes which might pass the grade. So if we use halal in a very technical, legalistic way, then we end up with the conclusion there are things which are halal and not tayyib, right? Let's say, aside from the meat issue, sugary things, unhealthy things in general, numbers, you have these guidebooks, what is the halal food guide and which numbers are allowed and not allowed. And that might be because some of them are derived from certain insects and beetles, and actually they're just the number. Hopefully everyone watching knows what I'm talking about. Numbers. This is a thing where you are as well. So we can sometimes find out that actually this is not halal in any way. And certain other things, like they might pass the halal test, but they don't pass the tayyib test. So what is the standard that we're being called to here? The standard is to enjoy the good things, not to make certain things unlawful that aren't unlawful, as the mushrikun did, to consider lawful things lawful, but also seek after a higher standard and enjoy responsibly. And that is coupled with the amana that we have towards our own bodies, right? Halalan tayyiban. So actually this expression, halalan tayyiban, I think is a very powerful one. It occurs in a number of different ayat of the Qur'an and calls on us to raise our standards and maybe question ourselves sometimes. This might be halal certified, but would it pass a tayyib certification process? And a lot of times, if the answer to that is no, maybe I should put it aside and prefer something else, which then is more pleasing to Allah, which is better for me. And by choosing what is better for me and my body, I'm actually worshipping Allah accordingly, and I'm showing gratitude. When He has given me so many good things and talked about those good things in the Quran, why am I choosing something else to not actually nourish my body, but maybe fill it up and bloat it and potentially destroy it? That's my sermon of the week.
Yeah, it's very popular amongst environmentalists to focus on the tayyib meaning, and I like that. It's and just also the governing bodies in our countries. The UK and Australia are somewhat similar, but America is very bad. Some of the things you can find on the shelves in supermarkets in America, you will not. It would be prohibited. It would be haram in Australia based on the government bodies. Right. And while talking about this, well, then imagine some of our Muslim countries. I personally feel more safe about halal food in the West than in Muslim countries, because I know in Australia, at least, there are governing bodies. And yes, there are, these halal bodies are at war with one another here in Australia as well, Ustadh Sohaib Saeed. Some of them, particularly when it comes to chicken, some of them have said, this machine slaughtering is okay. Some of them have given a fatwa that they're okay is not okay. So
there's news coming out of Turkey at the moment. Some famous supply chains. They even have, unfortunately, pork meat. Like this has been investigated. Like these are the kind of things you get from Muslim countries. Unfortunately, sometimes.
Well, we're finding out that that most or all the lamb that comes out of New Zealand is actually
all halal.
So that's the stuff that we can buy in our non-Islamic shops.
And Australia, any beef if you get from Australia, you're safe to have it.
That's pretty cool. But then how tayyib is this whole shipping across to the other side of the world? There could be other dimensions of that question. Maybe you should eat locally, eat from local.
Perhaps just at your sermon.
Is kangaroo halal?
It is right.
Kangaroo, kangaroo, camel. People eat kangaroo burgers here. It's a herbivore. It's a herbivore.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I was just going to say, like the general principle, everything is halal except they're deemed haram. Especially when we're dealing with people, community, when we are in amongst people, we don't want to make religion difficult for them and make it easy for them, but for ourselves, we can, I feel this lawful is the fatwa part. It ticks the Sharia box, and the tayyib part is quite grey. So that's where really I think the flexibility is, and perhaps that's something we could be harsh on ourselves, but a bit easygoing towards others. So.
We have it in our Islamic, like if you read Imam Ghazali's where he talks about ukhuwa, or when you visit people, not to offend them, not ask questions about the halalness of the food, and even eat slightly more. Sometimes they even say when you're a guest. Us imams and scholars, we have to be careful because we're always invited, we're always guests. If we take that fatwa, we'll just be very round people. But also sometimes, a lot of the people here in Australia and I'm sure in Britain and America, they're very considerate when they invite a non-Muslim. They may go out of their way to get halal meat. So also, if we are inviting Muslims that may be a bit more extra stringent, we can go out of our way to get that maybe hand-slaughtered chicken. Don't put him in that position. We have to show some level of sensitivity. But both sides have to show. One has to be a bit more relaxed and not so imposing, but the other side has to be a bit more sensitive ultimately.
Yeah. So then, just to sort of wrap up what we can take from these ayahs before we move on to the next page that we're reading as well. Do not follow the footsteps of shaitan. This is, of course, another general rule, but the mushrikun are being addressed with this. This point about following just preceded in the ayah before. So don't follow in the way of the shaitan. It could be, Satan, Iblis, right? Or it could just be meaning the shaitan in a broader sense as well. Aduwwul mubin, this is one of those terms that's used in a number of ayat that, Iblis, of course, had declared his enmity. And you can see the result of everything that he calls you to do. يَأْمُرُ
بِالسُّوءِ وَالْفَحْشَاءِ,
right? So everything that he commands you to do, you end up seeing the harm of it, right? So this is the mubin part as well, right? That he declared, but also, can't you see everything that Satan calls you to results in something bad? And at the core of that is making claims in religion without any basis, and that's a theme that's been following us through these ayat. And of course, forbidding certain animals with arbitrary categories that they had made up and was not part of the religion of Ibrahim. Because then in the following ayat, there's an emphasis on what are the things that have been forbidden, right? What are the things that were forbidden in the revelation before this, and then clarified in this revelation. And even in this revelation, there are certain things that the prohibition was lifted, certain stringent rules which had been sent for the people of the book, right? وَبِظُلْمٍ مِنَ الَّذِينَ هَادُوا حَرَّمْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ طَيِّبَاتٍ أُحِلَّتْ لَهُمْ. Right? So there were certain things which were طيبات that had been permitted, but the Jews due to certain actions that they had done, had this divine response. That certain things were prohibited to them. So there are certain things that was like self-imposed restrictions, and then there were certain things that were divinely imposed, but a stricture in response to ingratitude or evil, and not inherent, lack of being tayyib. طيبات أحلت لهم, right? So then this revelation comes with يحل لهم الطيبات, right? So he makes those طيبات halal again, right? Make طيبات halal again. This could be your campaign slogan, right? So all the things that were ruled out for a time, now this final revelation opens the matter, and these are the things, not the things that you have invented. Now, of course, there are some extension of these categories in the Islamic law, but they basically come back to these.
It's interesting, like a lot of the Meccan verses focus on the halal food. In the Meccan period, not many details of law are gone into, but the halal issue was there. About not eating animals that were sacrificed for other gods and so on. In Surah An-Na'am, there are a number of verses. But it does in the Medinan period, and this is Surah Baqarah, so I don't know when this verse may have been said to have been revealed. But any time it could be within 9 to 8 years, right? Because Baqarah started from the first year till 8 years till it completed. There have been some things that have been obviously by the Sunnah being made tahrim of, which, for example, domesticated donkeys. That was, the famous incident in Khaybar when Ustadh Sohaib mentioned the Jewish thing. It was the first time I connected the conquest of Khaybar with the Jewish community fought with the haram. So there are some extra things that's in the Sunnah as well. Because sometimes this verse says he has only forbidden innama. And in another verse, I think that's in Surah An'am, it says, say, I find nothing prohibited but the following. La ajidu, I forgot how it goes. I find nothing prohibited but the following. Exactly. That one. Yeah, so that's but the Sunnah shows that there are more categories. And it's another reminder. We read these two revelations, ma'bad, with one another.
Yeah, but in a way, it's not. There's certain categories, and because we were talking about kangaroos and being herbivores, and so there are the broad categories, and then there are the things that required being singled out and specified and clarified.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what those ayats are pointing to.
Yeah.
Whereas they have added certain categories which neither fall under the usul nor the clarified furu'. Mm-hmm. That is what's being criticized of them.
Okay. Just in terms of munasabat, we was talking about the followers and followed, and then the verse went into food. Imam Harali says that deen that was being discussed was the food of the hearts. Now the food of the bodies is being discussed. That was his version, attempted showing a munasabat.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously there's a spiritual side to it, like Ustadh Sohaib talked about tayyib, but there are also verses like زُيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ حُبُّ الشَّهَوَاتِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ وَالْبَنِينَ أَوْ أَذْهَبْتُمْ طَيِّبَاتِكُمْ فِي حَيَاتِكُمُ الدُّنْيَا وَاسْتَمْتَعْتُمْ بِهَا. If you look from a zuhud and thing perspective, like many things could be tayyib, but going into excess in them, the books on Islamic spirituality will say that sometimes the small deeds that are not given importance to are sometimes small sins, are more dangerous than the big sins, because they're the ones that. So sometimes even Ustadh Ahmet, we know that the famous, what's the Turkish saying? Tatmak izin var, doymak izin yok. Yani, you have a right to taste, but you don't have a right to be satiated in this world. So anything in excesses might be going to shaitan's footsteps, following. Israf is part of his fitra in Sahha Ta'bir. And also it says, shaitan, he commands you to say about Allah what you do not know. Shaitan's 3 powers are mentioned in the Quran. This is one of them. It's usually psychological, making you forget the Quran, forget things, and then to say things about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we do not know. Other than that, in our Muslim cultures, we attribute extra powers to Shaitan that even the Quran does not afford him. That's just a reminder about that one. And this verse, but if anyone is forced to eat such things by hunger, neither desiring them nor going to excess, these are the verses that form the principles of that, the Islamic usul, that in difficult situations, what's the famous saying? إنما ضرورات تبيح المحظورات. That difficult circumstances make the what's prohibited allowed. And the rahmah of the Sharia, every time it mentions this, right after mentioning blood, carrion, and pig meat, mentions that. But if your life is at stake, you can't take it. غير باغ ولا عاد.
Ibn Kathir quotes Ibn Abbas about verse 170. He says that it's actually revealed about a group of Jews. And the Prophet calls to Islam, and then they refuse, saying, rather we shall follow what we found forefathers following. I guess we've heard this from different parts of the Quran. We see it from the polytheists as well. So that was kind of interesting. But for the verse that follows, which is quite an interesting verse about the herdsman calling to things, there's Tabari has two. There's a quote from a Tabari here, and some other Mufassirs as well. One is when the herdsman calls out to an animal, and obviously the animal doesn't understand anything. So I guess the kafir does not understand the verses that are being revealed onto them, or that are being passed on to them. And the other one is that it's when a disbeliever says things where an idol doesn't understand. So it's now the animal is the shepherd is the, let's say, the disbeliever, and the idols are the subjects. But Tabari takes the first kind of the first interpretation. So yeah.
Yeah, this often different ways to analyze the same parable. And Ibn Ashur also is on this view that it's not about the specific piece that corresponds to each piece, but rather the overall picture that the Prophet ﷺ is calling out to them. And it's like a situation where someone is calling out to these animals that really are, they don't have the sense to understand what is being said to them. They just hear a kind of, just hear noises.
Yeah, and just going back to what I think Ustadh Sadeq had mentioned about following blindly, right, earlier on about some of the verses, just being stuck or following blindly their forefathers just because they did certain things, they believed in certain things without any investigation, without any research on their own behalf. They just continue whatever they picked up from the past.
There's this tendency in human beings to almost see their lineage and their traditions as somewhat holy. And I think, yeah, Islam is asking us to be a bit on the watch, you know. A lot of it perhaps is good and it's urf, it's ma'ruf, but a lot of it could be.
Was that
You know,
that's you did at the end of your sentence? Your sentence has ended. Are we supposed to use our imagination to fill in?
no, like like some of
Yeah.
these things are intrinsic, but like we have to be extra alert to fight them, because we can, although this is in relation to belief in following the message that God has sent, but generally, you know, the Prophet in the Hadith says 4 things will not be removed from Jahiliyyah, from this ummah. One of them is pride in your lineage. The other one is ta'an, in the lineage of others, to curse or to belittle other people's lineages. And the third and the fourth one right now, one is to believe like the stars have effect on the rain, like connecting things to astrology too much. And I forgot the third one, but they're all connected to this lineage. It's like he says, these things was not removed because it's somewhat you could say it's ingrained in, it can almost be ingrained in human nature. It's very easy to slip into. The Quran says, you know, remember Allah like you remembered your forefathers. Maybe that one, Ustadh Sohaib, we can mention that qualitatively and then quantitatively. أَوْ أَشَدُّ ذِكْرًا. But it's almost like it's ingrained in human beings to just feel like their lineage is special, and you know,
that's how people also grow up too, though. Like it's almost part of the truth. You know, you get raised by whether your fathers, the community you live in, that whatever you're on is right. Like there's this big thing about this Armenian genocide, right? Turkey Armenian genocide. As a Turk, you know, the things that you hear in your community, the people around you, that nothing happened, right? But then, you know, it's not that simple. Perhaps when you start doing some research and you start understanding it, you know, you see that there has been some killings and unfortunately perhaps massacres. I'm not too sure whether it's like innate or it's actually kind of passed on, taught. Yeah, like, but yeah.
Yeah, so
Coming
I mean,
back to our verses, yes,
I'm sure that some viewers might get a bit, you know, sensitive about certain specifics that can be brought up.
Yeah.
But like, I also have been looking at, you know, I've been observing very, you know, with a lot of interest over the past year, anti-Zionist Jews, you know, and how they talk about their thought process. Just yesterday, I read one tweet, as we used to call it, right? A post on X, where someone was talking about how, you know, what's the reason why children in Palestine are throwing stones against their occupier. And there was somebody who said, look, I was actually serving there back when I didn't know better. And I had stones thrown at me, and I agree with those stones. Now that he's come to understand from another perspective. But he just briefly alluded to the process of unlearning of certain narratives and of certain oppressive things, which then even turn religion into a hellish entity. You know, I don't know to what extent we could even call Zionism a religious phenomenon, but it's an outgrowth of a certain interpretation of religion or of religious identity. You know, la'an Allahul identity. Anyway, so identity politics is like the root of so many evils, rather than a religion based on principles. So there are people, of course, who are Jewish and who are sincerely religious, and others perhaps who are not that religious, but who have seen past these modes of thinking, which got to the point where, you know, and there was an interview with some author, I think, and, you know, I just saw one quote from it, but it was like one of these tortuous things whereby we are the good guys, you know, and every time that we hear that Israel has killed babies, which is a fact, right? There's no disputing this. And even soldiers directly shooting children in the head. This is a fact established by doctors who are working on the ground. And the thing is that people watching this who belong to that, supposedly to that group, the ones who haven't been able to say, for example, I'm Jewish, but those people are evil and they don't represent me. But there are others who still say, yeah, but I still identify with them. So it hurts me when people point out that they're shooting babies. And then they've come up with this absurd thing that they keep repeating about blood libel. There was a real thing called blood libel, of course, in the the Dark Ages or whatever, where Jews were accused of taking the blood of Christian children and mixing it in there. And now if you point out just to the fact of the matter and the news and the evidence of our eyes that the Zionist state is killing babies, well, no, this is blood libel. The absurdity follows from being unable to break from the ways of your fathers, the ways of your community or culture that you have identified with, and be able to stick to principle. Of course, many people do. Thank God for them, because that gives us a basis to say there is a difference between the religion here and this hellish identity project, which is an ethnocentric, supremacist, apartheid, genocide regime. So how do we separate the two? It's not hard for us as people of principle, but it seems to be hard for some of the people who are part of that identity to do that. We have to listen to the ones who articulate it.
Yeah, I think like what you're doing
we
is
don't
very...
get also fooled by the attempts of those nefarious people to actually equate the two, because we're not the ones doing that.
But to actively question what you know, what you assume is truth, and unlearn what you said, there's an element of bravery, and it's not easy. It's not easy. It requires some juhud and effort. Unfortunately, in Muslim countries, the ones that personally I've been to, in different ones, Arab world, Turkish world, great persecutions happen, and you see a deafening silence, unfortunately, more than the silence. In fact, I don't want to go into details, but many mosques when I was in Egypt, I got turned off because, the scholars were great, but they just kept talking about. But let me say something positive. I like Sheikh Walid Basuni from Al-Maghrib Institute. Allah preserve him. He said while he was studying with his shuyukh in, I think it was in Saudi, he said one of his teachers always mentioned another sheikh, but every time he mentioned him, he mentioned when he disagreed with him. He said, oh, but he said this and I disagree with him. Basically, every time this other sheikh was mentioned in front of his teacher, he would talk about what they disagreed about. But then the sheikh eventually got locked up, as it happens in the Middle East. And then every time this person who got locked up was mentioned to his sheikh, after he was locked up, he never mentioned his disagreement. So Sheikh Walid said, I went to him. I went to my teacher. I asked him, what's this? You used to always mention your disagreement, but now you don't. He said, now that he's in a state of Mazloom, it's not the time for me to mention difference of opinion. This is the time when I need to support my brother. Like, this is someone he really disagreed with, passionately, obviously. But when he was in a state of being in a position, he would defend him. I really like that example. That shows, fiqh al-waqi, know when to defend someone, when not to. Anyway, sorry, my example is a bit off topic.
Not at all.
Yeah, but the point was just sometimes, us Muslims, we can learn a lot from what Ustadh Sohaib said. These Jews that speak about the descendant voices within the Jewish community.
And sadly as well, I've been observing the reactions to them, and it's very stark. Like, those who are defending Zionism and all the things that it is doing, they don't give any respect whatsoever to these dissenting voices. They don't say, well, maybe those other people have a point. They will just throw self-hating Jew, and then they have other more, slur kind of words that they use for this.
Sayyidina Umar, when he said, "La khayra fikum in lam tansahuna, wa la khayra fina in lam nakun in lam nuhibb al-nasihin. I forgot exactly. There's no good in you if you do not correct us and give us advice, and no good in us. A sign of good leadership is when they love people that criticize them. Not love it, but they're open. They're looking for it. They provide platform.
We always expect the other to do this. That's the other thing. So I think for Muslims generally, we don't have, okay, you might come from a particular country, so you have a sort of bond with it. But as Muslims, you can say, oh, but this country did that and that country did that. And we'll say, yeah, well, they represent themselves, not Islam. Whereas, if you set up a project that where this represents actually us and our religion and our community and our thousands of years of history, now you've created a big problem for yourself, right? Because of what is going to end up doing. And it had to do because of how it was set up, right? It was created for genocide. There was no way of getting around that fact. Incidentally, I always say the best thing that the Muslims, actually, I've never said this out loud. I always think to myself, the best thing that the Muslim world could have done in response to Zionism was to set up a second Jewish state. And I think that we missed a trick. If we had just said, let's just make another place here and encourage some Jews to set up a second Jewish state, then khalas, they would have been going through what we go through with each other, which is internal strife and avoiding dealing with the external problems. So there we go. That's just a point of view. But speaking of those who conceal the scripture that God sent down and sell it for a small price, this is a return in these ayat to obviously the issue that has been in some of the preceding ayat.
About 2 pages ago.
Yeah, with the people of the book
Yeah.
hiding the realities of the scripture and its teachings, taking some worldly benefit from that, and of them it is said they only fill their bellies with fire. And there's all this tremendous punishment which is outlined for these people. Now, one of the expressions that I think is hard to translate, and I think I looked at a few translations and felt that they were totally off, and then this is the one that I've put here. Abdul Halim also was off, in my opinion. But this is what I've changed it to. فَمَا أَصْبَرَهُمْ عَلَى النَّارِ. مَا أَصْبَرَهُم is a ta'ajjub. مَا أَحْسَنَ الْقَمَرَ. How beautiful is the moon, right? مَا أَجْمَلَ الْقَمَرَ, for example. So مَا أَصْبَرَهُم, how patient they are in the fire. No, they're not in the fire now. It's not talking about them being in the fire and having patience. It's like they are currently acting as though the fire is no big deal. The punishment that's coming to them is no big deal. Therefore, they continue doing the actions of the people of the fire. And the only people who would do that are people who consider it no big deal. So they are in their life now acting in a state of sabr. That is to say, placency. They are totally relaxed at the fact that they are living the lives of the people of hellfire. Did you have another analysis of this from Biqai, for example?
Imam Baqai says, he goes, after pondering about it, he goes, he thinks it could be, if you see it as majaz, as if you're saying to someone who's rebelling or to a leader, saying to them, "Ma asbaraka ala sijn al-tawil wal qayd al-thaqil." You're so patient when it comes to a long prison sentence and heavy chains. Yeah. But he says, "Tahdidan lahu." You're saying it to them so that they change their mind, yani, threatening them.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of the translations really just missed this point. Maybe they did not know the ma af'ala lil-ta'ajjub. So they thought it means something like, what made them so patient or something like that.
Yeah, as it comes to ma, how they understood the ma there, I guess. فَمَا أَصْبَرْهُمْ عَلَى النَّارِ. He also says after the fire, he says, الَّتِي أَكَلُوهَا فِي الدُّنْيَا.
Ah, yes.
Because
they
don't fill their bellies except for with fire. So he also gives that translation. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, straight after the verse about the halal and haram, once it comes to the spiritual things of theological matters like kitmanul ilm or kitmanul wahi, hiding the revelation of God, it doesn't mention what they ate that was fire. It was whatever they ate was fire, because their source of income became haram. Sometimes, you know, there's this comment made that us Muslims are very observant when it comes to pig meat, for particularly. But if we had that same level of sensitivity with other halal issues, particularly about how we earn the income, the ummah will be more on the right track, something like that.
Yeah.
Hafizan Allah.
Let's go on a little detour looking at translations. It's quite interesting.
Mustafa Khattab has a similar translation to you, Sohaib. So,
Well, how persistent are they in
Yeah.
pursuit of the fire? A number of translators went on this pursuit thing, and it gets to the general meaning. Yeah. But nobody used the word complacent, which I think is actually
yeah.
because persistent implies, you know, now asbarahum ala talab an-nar, which is a different kind of analysis. But there are some people who said, you know, how will they let me see, the study Quran had something that was how will they endure the fire? Or Safi Kaska says, yet they have no tolerance for the fire. So this is just misunderstanding the math. Yeah, I mean, we're not too involved in translation here, but obviously if the translation is wrong, you don't understand what the ayah was actually saying. So it's not saying, how will they withstand the fire? It's not. It is not saying they have no tolerance for the fire. Actually, it's saying they have just too much tolerance for the fire. Not when they are in the fire, of course, because that wouldn't make sense. But in their life now, they're acting as people who are in pursuit of the fire. So those translations that said that, that's reasonable as well.
Should we?
Yeah, the lesson that we can learn: the fire cannot have any sabr. We can't show any sabr to the fire in this world, nor can we. May Allah protect us from being in it.
Yeah, it's almost like saying, well, if you feel that you can have sabr in the hereafter, if you feel that you can keep on taking the punishment, then keep on seeking after that punishment. Keep on doing what you're doing. Right? Isn't it Muhammad Ali, rahimahullah, the famous boxer? I'm sure there's a story about him. He used to carry like matches and he would just hold it to his hand. I'm not recommending people do it, but it's a kind of Ghazalian sort of thing to do, right? Ghazali would tell you to do some funny things sometimes in order to, you know, create that mental habit that, you know, if I cannot tolerate this heat, then it reminds me that I cannot tolerate the heat of the hereafter. So that kind of visceral reaction.
Yeah. We often extrapolate for good things, like, you know, we see the beauty in creation and we think how beautiful is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and compassion and love and mercy, all these things. But I think this part we neglect often, where we see a bit of punishment or wrath, and then we start thinking about the hellfire or the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Unfortunately, it's a bit harder thing to do, perhaps. Yeah.
Good.
Okay, inshallah. Maybe that could bring us to the end of tonight, inshallah. And we'll continue from verse 177, inshallah, next week.
ليس البر آية البر.
Beautiful.
Very good. And آية القصاص, which I wrote a paper about. Inshallah, we'll have fun with
that one we should spare one whole session. Is that what you're saying? Is that saying?
Well, I can do it. I can do a condensed.
We should. We should have a separate YouTube video maybe for that one.
I do.
You
I
do? Okay.
Our channel, you can find
Mashallah.
us. Inshallah.
Maybe you should
We
share
should
the
just
link.
cut Sohaib explanation next week and put that up as a separate video.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I get into some complexities about the history of the interpretation and Ibn Taymiyyah's particular view, and so that's the paper is maybe too much for us just in terms of appreciating it. But as we'll see, there's two tracks that we can go on. One is the Jumhur, one is Ibn Taymiyyah's, and I believe Ibn Taymiyyah's is actually the better one. But inshallah, we'll explain that next time.
Shaykhul Islam. No worries. Okay, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum and have a good night.
Alaikum assalam.